let's stay with this particular conversation now and speak to Ibrahim Harvey, independent political commentator, Angelo Fick, Director of Research at Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute. Good evening to you both, and thank you so much for your time. Angelo, of course, a number of people have had quite a lot to say, especially when they look at Floyd Shivambu's decision to not only leave the EFF, but also join the MK party. Some have characterized this as a mistake. What's your take?
Well, whether or not it is a mistake is going to be Mr. Shivambu's realization. As somebody who's simply observing what is going on, it does seem to be that there is something internal to the economic freedom fighters that has to be addressed, and that has to do with what the top leadership know about one another and one another's ambitions, both inside the party and in South African politics more generally, and then also what is happening inside
the problems, you know, technical problems.
Then the question is, to what extent?
All right, Angela, we're struggling to hear you somewhat, and I think there is a little bit of interference in that line. My apologies for that. Let's try again, because you and I are talking about something that is important, and especially when you think about the fact that right now, this is a political party, especially the EFF, as we've just heard as well, saying that they're now going to their structures. They're going to the People's Assembly. And I wonder, given what we are seeing unfolding, his, of course, exit from the party, and others are saying maybe others could follow suit. What position does it put them in as they head for this People's Assembly?
So I think they will work out what exactly happened in their electioneering campaign in KwaZulu-Natal, where Mr. Shivambu was deployed, and the underperformance, if one can call it that diplomatically, of the EFF in the province will need to be accounted for. Secondly, they would have to, I think, consolidate the top structure of the party to make sure that there aren't further defections, for want of a better word, and that the party stabilizes itself over the next, shall we say, 6 to 8 weeks.
And when it comes then to yesterday, he joins the MK party. He's now the national organizer, and a number of people, of course, have been talking about this political party, saying that it doesn't have structures. But right now there are structures, there are people in place, there's now a high command. So this particular high command and what we saw yesterday, does it, speak about the issue of, addressing some of the structural concerns around this party and stability?
So I'm not going to have the conferences. I think it's self-telling because...
All right. Angela, I'm going to ask us just to pause for a second, and we just take a short break and we try to see exactly what's going on with this line in order to be able to try and have a conversation where we are able to then be able to hear one another. Let's take a short break, back straight after. All right, let's try and have this conversation now, as we were looking at the exit by Floyd Shivambu from the EFF to the MK party. We speak now to Dr. Ibrahim Harvey, independent political commentator. We were also in conversation with Angelo Fick, Director of Research at Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute. I hope it's a better line to you, Angelo. And we were talking, of course, about the significance of this particular move and joining the MK party with an EFF that is trying right now to go to all its structures to ensure that things have stabilized ahead of its People Assembly.
Absolutely. And so what I think will need to happen in KwaZulu-Natal is the party will need to take some account for why it did not perform as well in that particular province as it projected for itself, in addition to its national reflection that its share of the vote overall has declined since the last general elections. And so that's some internal issues that will have to be fixed. And that will require structures to be accountable, but also for the leaders to reflect upon what has happened between deploying Mr. Shivambu to KwaZulu-Natal and the electoral returns there.
Dr. Harvey, I hope you are able to hear us now. You've penned a column and you say that, the decision, and I remember you said this as well just recently, that the decision by Floyd Shivambu to join the MK party was a mistake, given what you call the chaos that you say was unfolding within the MK party. We now speak a day after the party, that is the MK party, has now, announced its high command, which is now its structure. He's now the national organizer. You still hold the same view? Dr. Harvey? All right, it does seem like we do have a problem with that line there to Dr. Harvey, but let me stay with you, Angelo. Yesterday, listening to what Floyd Shivambu had to say, and I'm quoting, small unviable political parties are not sustainable for black people. He talks about the fact that, and I quote, when you have a multiple of these, they end up becoming fiefdoms of individuals, although he did say, in fact, that he was not characterizing the EFF. But let's look at the statement against the backdrop of the MK party, because some have said more of the same about it?
So I think that what we've seen is the smaller parties in the South African political spectrum have often become personality cults. They've become focused on individuals who've led them for at least a generation now. And that's the post-1994 politics. And we've seen new parties emerge in the wake of 2012, doing the same thing in 2014, in 2019, and 2024. Now, some of those have gone the way of flesh. They no longer exist. But it's interesting that Mr. Shivambu chooses to exclude the EFF from this and to go into an organization where there seems to be a lot of internal, shall we say, chaos, partly because there aren't appropriate structures, but also partly because decision-making is not clearly rational. It isn't entirely clear who makes the decision about who serves in Parliament if there's no structure accountable for it. Who is responsible for removing those people from Parliament? Who is responsible for constructing lists? And this is partly what these multiple court processes seem to be about, the legitimacy of removing and moving people. And for Mr. Shivambu to join such an organization, he must be making a choice that his future is at least secure inside the MK party, unlike those 10 people taking the party to court, and unlike the former Secretary General, who is now in some kind of legal battle ongoing with the party.
So, given the history between, the former president and himself, of course, yesterday, listening to what Zuma had to say, he's got praises, nothing but praises for Shivambu. But does this mean that we can safely say the tensions that we've seen in the past are behind them?
One does not know, because a lot of this is political performance. It is both for an internal audience to the party itself, the MK party, as well as South African public that has to be made to believe certain aspects of this party. But who can forget that Mr. Shivambu and Mr. Malema were both members of the Youth League under Mr. Zuma's presidency of the ANC. They were expelled from the ANC Youth League. They then formed their own party, and as the elected representatives of that party in the 2014 Parliament, they were the ones who coined the phrase "pay back the money," shouting this at Mr. Zuma as president around the spend on Nkandla. We've since seen in the wake of Mr. Ramaphosa's ascendancy, they were very soft and, shall we say, diplomatic in relation to his first few Q&As in Parliament. They proceeded to change that and became quite close to Mr. Zuma in the wake of 2021. And since we've seen these kinds of shifts, my sense would be that it is a different politician. And once said it's a very long time. A day is a very long time in politics. I suspect that Mr. Shivambu and Mr. Zuma have come to some kind of agreement about what their future together will be. Whether that works out in the longer term is a different story, because, again, there will have been people inside the MK family who will have had their eye on the position he currently has and will have had to be convinced that Mr. Shivambu is the better choice over them.
And speaking of that then, does it change anything within the Progressive Caucus, that forum that they were all trying to form, saying that they are going to be representing the black voices in Parliament? Does it change their dynamics at all?
I can't imagine that it will not change the dynamics, so that in the, shall we say, 7 days that have passed, Julius Malema's reconciliatory or conciliatory gestures towards Mr. Shivambu of last week have shifted to a much more, shall we say, vocal and no tolerance for dissent position inside the party this week. So what will happen over the next parliamentary session between EFF members and MK members who may have been members of the EFF before we will have to wait and see. And again, this is the instability inside the MK party now beginning to affect other parties that have aligned themselves with the MK party. And my sense is that we're only at the beginning of a process that may unfold over the entire parliamentary calendar over the next year. as well as over the next 3 to 5 years as we head towards local government elections and then the next national government elections.
And I was going to ask about that, because what does it mean then as we head then towards the local government elections, because you've got the government of national unity at the same time to consider, because these are different political parties that have come together at the same time. Now you speak about these political parties that are also feeling what is going on within the MK party. There's local government that all these political parties are now preparing themselves for.
Absolutely. And in that local government, there are ward councillors who have very particular local community loyalties that they have to account for. There are local structures inside the economic freedom fighters that are, aligned to community structures. The MK party doesn't seem to have structures yet, but is in the process of creating them, and perhaps relying on the older ANC structures that it may have inherited in places like KwaZulu-Natal, or usurped the loyalties and patronages between individuals in that party, in MK seeming to take on some of the disaffected ANC members that came out of the 2022 ANC conference quite unhappy about what had happened to them. And so in the next local government elections, I think there are going to be many, many problems for local officials who want to call on local communities in relation to party shall we say, requirements for what they want at the regional and national level. And there, I think, the issue of violence in KwaZulu-Natal, political violence in KwaZulu-Natal, which has been an ongoing thing for the last 30 years of democracy, and partly come from before the democratic period, that's also going to have to be taken into account, because, as these tensions become quite local at ward level, at community level, I think parties and individuals are going to have to take some tough choices about continued involvement in local politics if the stakes become higher than they already are.
It's going to be an interesting road ahead. Angelo, thank you so much for bearing with us. I appreciate your time this afternoon. That was Angelo Fick, the Director of Research at Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute.